Section 3.1, Linear Functions. Slope, graphing, parallel, and perpendicular lines. So in Unit 2, we learned what a function is, and now in Unit 3, we are going to study several different types of functions, starting in this section with linear functions. You have probably studied linear functions in some algebra class in the past, so some of this material may just be review for you. We're going to start with talking about slope. Slope is the measure of the steepness of a line. It is denoted by the letter M. When you think of slope, think of rise over run. Rise over run. And especially when we're graphing, we will be using that a lot. And then on this slide, you also see a formula to find the slope whenever you are given two ordered pairs. You will just substitute into the formula to find the slope. If you can remember that slope is rise over run, that will help you to remember the y's go on the top, because the y's represent the vertical movement, the change in y, and then the change in x represents your run, your horizontal movement. So it actually doesn't matter whether you start with y2 or y1, but whichever one you start with on top, you have to be consistent on the bottom. So if I do start with y2 on the top, I must start with x2 on the bottom. So let's just practice. Well, actually, before we practice, let's look at this slide. The slope tells us something about the line. Anytime the slope is positive, it tells us the line rises. So if you look at the graph, it means it goes up from left to right. Now we've already studied increasing, so that's another way you could think of this, okay? But in this section, we are just going to use the word rises rather than increasing. When the slope is negative, it tells you that the graph falls, the line falls. We're only looking at graphs of lines in this section. So look at this line here on the second row. From left to right, it goes down. That means it falls. And it will do that anytime the slope is negative. Okay, the third row. If the slope is 0, m equals 0, the line will be horizontal. So just a horizontal line there. And the last row says if the slope is undefined, the line will be vertical. Now these bottom two you probably want to memorize so that you do not get the two mixed up. That's a common mistake that I see students make. You have to remember that when the slope is 0, the line is horizontal, and when the slope is undefined, the line is vertical. Let's think for a minute why that would be. So if we're looking at the slope, rise over run, okay? For m to be 0, you would have to have a 0 on the top, and it could be any number on the bottom. We'll just say 3. So that would turn out to equal 0. But to get 0 on top means the y values have to be the same. And if the y values are the same, your line is horizontal. Okay, so the other possibility would be 0 on bottom. Remember, under the line is undefined. Now, to get a 0 on the bottom of your slope formula, the x's would have to be the same. And if the x coordinates are the same, it will cause a vertical line. So that's why it works this way. A quick way to help you remember, if you set a 0 on a horizontal line, it'll stay on the line. So horizontal slope is 0. If you try to put a 0 on a vertical line, it will just roll off. So the slope of a vertical line is undefined. And that may seem kind of silly, but anything that you can do to help you remember which is which, okay? And then one more thing, having a slope of 0 is actually having a slope. That's not the same thing as no slope. 0 is a number, and it is a slope. Okay, so let's practice now using the formula. It says find the slope of the line passing through each pair of points. Indicate whether the line rises, falls, is horizontal, or vertical. So you have two ordered pairs. If it helps you to label them, you could do that. The first ordered pair, we will call that x1, y1. And the second one will be, that'll be an x, x2, y2. And let's go ahead and write down the slope formula. It's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now we're going to substitute. So I'm going to start with my second y. I'm going to follow this formula exactly. Put y2 in first on the top. y2 is 5 minus y1. y1 is 3. So 5 minus 3 for the y's. Then I have to start with my second x since I started with my second y. So x2 is 2 minus x1 is negative 1. So make sure you get minus negative. You get the signs correct. And now we do those operations. 5 minus 3 is 2. And 2 minus negative 1 is the same as 2 plus 1. So that would be 3. And that cannot simplify any further. Always simplify as far as you can, but 2/3 cannot simplify, so that is my slope. I've answered this part of the question. Find the slope. The slope is 2/3. We'll go ahead and box that in. But there is more to the question. It then says, indicate whether the line rises, falls, is horizontal, or is vertical. So that's where you just look at the sign of your number. It's a positive 2/3. So because it's positive, the line rises. So that's the second answer. Just write rises. Or if you prefer to just sketch a line that rises, it goes up from left to right instead of writing the word, I'll accept either of those. Just make sure you do answer that second part. Let's try another one. Okay, so we have two ordered pairs again. I'm going to go ahead and label again. This is x1, y1, and x2, y2. And I'm going to write the formula again. The more you write it, the more you'll remember it. And then we will substitute. Okay. So I'm going to put y2 first. y2 is 5. Minus y1 is negative 4, so minus negative. And for the x's, I've got 3 for x2. Minus, I also have a 3 for x1. Okay, so on top, 5 minus negative 4 is like 5 plus 4, so that's 9. On bottom, I get 0. Now, if you get 0 on top or bottom, don't ever stop there. You need to go ahead, and if it's on bottom, you would say M is undefined. That's the answer to the slope, undefined. Remember, under the line is undefined. Now, if I had worked out a problem and I got 0 on top, let's say I got 0 over 9. Again, I wouldn't leave it right there. To simplify that, you would go ahead and say that is 0. 0 divided by any non-zero number equals 0. So make sure you take that last step there. And then to answer the second part of the question, does the line rise, fall, or is it horizontal or vertical? If the slope is undefined, the line is vertical. And try your best to spell that correctly. It is there in the instructions, so if you're not sure how to spell it, you can look in the instructions. Or again, if you prefer to just sketch a vertical line, that will work. Now, some of you may realize when you looked at the ordered pairs to start with that you see the same x's. And so if the x's are the same and we drew that line, we know already it's going to be vertical. Think about it. You don't have to graph these, but I just want to show you real quick here. So if we go to 1, 2, 3, here's 3 on the x-axis. And I'm not going to make this extremely accurate, but let's say we plot 3, -4 would be down here, and 3, 5 would be up here, and we draw a line. It is, of course, going to be a vertical line. So if you recognize that the line's going to be vertical without even doing this formula, that's fine. You could just say, okay, this is a vertical line, and I know that the slope of a vertical line is undefined. So it would be possible to answer that without the formula in this case. Or you may want to go ahead and do it both ways to kind of double check yourself. Okay, next we're going to look at some equations of lines. The first one on this slide is called the point slope form. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And I'm just going to kind of quickly go through these, and then we will talk more about them as we work problems. The slope-intercept form, that's one you've probably seen before. Y equals mx plus b. Remember, m is slope. We'll go ahead and write that on here. Let me put the red. We know that the m, which is in front of the x, is the slope. So we'll put that m is slope. And the b is the y-intercept. B is the y-intercept. And we'll look more at that here in a little bit. The general form has all the terms on the same side and 0 on the other side. I will not ask you to put any of your answers in general form, but sometimes the equation to start with may be given in that general form. So I just wanted to go ahead and put that in our list of equations. And then the bottom two. Vertical lines have an x in the equation. A is just any real number. Okay. A horizontal line has a y in the equation, and b is just a number. So for example, for a vertical line, I might have something like x equals 2. It only has an x in it, no y. Then I know that it has to be a vertical line. And for a horizontal, it would be y equals some number. The equation has a y in it, but no x at all. That indicates that it is a horizontal line. And again, we'll come back and study each of these a little bit more as we go through the lesson. So the next type of problem is going to ask us to find the equation of a line. Anytime you're trying to find the equation of a line, you need two things. You need at least one point on the line, an ordered pair, and you need the slope of the line. If the point that is given is the y-intercept, then that's B, okay? So if you know the slope and you know the y-intercept, you can just substitute directly into the slope-intercept form, and then you're done. But if the point is not the y-intercept, so you do not know what B is, that's when we're going to use this point slope form. And we'll substitute into it and simplify it until it gets into slope-intercept form. So let me show you some examples. It says, use the given conditions to write an equation for each line. write the answer in slope-intercept form. So number 1, the slope is 8. That is m. Passing through 4, -1. So anytime they give you the point, think about, is that point the y-intercept? Well, if I plot 4, -1 in the coordinate system, it is certainly not going to be on the y-axis. The only time I would know that the point is the y-intercept is if the x-coordinate is 0. So this is not the y-intercept. Okay, so when I do not know the y-intercept, I am going to use the point-slope form. I'm going to go and write it down here. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. All right, we're going to substitute. The y and the x that do not have subscripts are just going to stay y and x. Then we're going to do minus -1. In place of m, we're going to put 8. And then we keep this first x. Minus x1 is 4. So this ordered pair here, this is your x1, y1. Now we want to simplify that until we get it into slope-intercept form. So over here on the left side, minus negative, always go ahead and write that as a plus. And if you are comfortable doing that from the beginning, rather than writing minus negative on this step, you can go ahead and put y plus 1. It turns out that this sign will always be opposite of the sign in the ordered pair. It's kind of like when we did circles. The center had the opposite sign from the equation. Okay, on the right side, distribute the 8. And then the next step, we want to get y isolated. So let's subtract the 1. So now we have y by itself. We still have 8x, and these two combine. Same signs, add and keep the sign. That is our answer in slope-intercept form. Okay, let's try another example. This time the slope is 1/3, so that's our m. Passing through the origin. Now we need our point to be in the form of an ordered pair. So if it says origin, the ordered pair is 0, 0. Now every time you have a point, remember, stop and think about, is that point the y-intercept? And yes, it is. The origin is on both the x and the y-axis. So this point is a y-intercept of the graph. Now that means whatever number is in the y is equal to b. So b is 0. Therefore, instead of going through the point-slope form, I could go directly to y equals mx plus b. And substitute my 1/3 in place of m. So it's 1/3 times x. Make sure you don't put the x on the bottom of your fraction. You can put it in the middle or even closer to the top, but do not put the x next to the 3. Then it will look like it's in the denominator. Plus b is 0. Now we can go ahead and simplify that because 1/3 x plus 0 is just 1/3 x. And there's our equation in slope-intercept form. However, if you didn't think about the fact that the origin is the y-intercept and you used the point-slope form like we did in number 1, you would still end up with this same answer. Okay? Going directly to y equals mx plus b is just kind of a shortcut. But the point-slope form that we used in number 1 will always work. Okay, number 3. This time it says passing through -2, -4, and 2, -1. So we want the equation of the line that passes through those 2 points. Now remember, the requirements for writing the equation are you need a point, which we have, and you need the slope, which we do not have. So this problem will require an extra step. We're going to have to find the slope on our own. So that's step 1. We'll put that here. Step 1. Find the slope. And we're going to do that using m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, so we're going to plug in. And that's going to be, let's start with our second y, -1, minus our first y, -4. And then the x's. I'm going to go back to my second, start with the second, and be 2 minus my first x, -2. And then we're going to simplify. So on top, that's -1 plus 4 becomes a 3. And on bottom, 2 minus negative is same as plus, so 2 plus 2 is 4. So the slope is 3/4. So now I have the slope and I have a point. It actually does not matter which of those points you use. Neither one of them are the y-intercept. So, actually let's do this in red. For step 2, we're going to use the point slope form. And again, like I said, it doesn't matter whether you use this first point as your x1, y1 or this second point as your x1, y1. But you have to pick one of them. You cannot mix and match. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do this first one as my x1, y1. Now I'm ready to substitute. So y stays y minus -4. So again, rather than writing minus negative, if you just want to go straight to writing plus 4, then that would be fine. In place of m, we put 3/4, and then keep the x, minus negative. Minus negative becomes a plus 2. Okay, so on the next step, I'm going to distribute the 3/4. So 3/4 times x plus 3/4 times 2. Now if you can't do that in your head, you can come out to the side. We're going to do 3/4 times 2. Let's make it 2/1. And we could go straight across, which would then be 6/4. And simplify the 6/4 would be 3/2. So we put 3/2 here. 3/4 times 2 gives us the 3/2. All right, next step, we want to get the y by itself, so we're going to subtract 4 on both sides. So we have y equals 3/4 x. And then we need to do this operation, 3/2 minus 4. So again, I'm going to kind of do some work out to the side. We want to give that answer as a fraction, not as a mixed number and not as a decimal, okay? So if I want to do 3/2 minus 4, let's make it 4/1. I would probably do it just by getting a common denominator. So my LCD is going to be 2. Then I'm going to multiply by 2 on top and bottom of the second fraction. So now I have 3/2 minus 8/2. Then I can do the operation 3 minus 8 and keep the denominator. So the result is minus 5/2. And that is the answer. That is the equation in slope-intercept form. So again, for this y-intercept here, when you're having to work with fractions, we want it to be a fraction. We do not want a mixed number. We do not want a decimal there. All right, let's do one more example of finding the equation of the line. So on this example, number 4, it says the x-intercept is 4 and the y-intercept is -2. So they are actually telling you 2 points on the line. However, they did not give them as ordered pairs. So we need to go ahead and write them in ordered pair form. If the x-intercept is 4, then I would put 4 in the x-coordinate and the y would be 0. So that point would be on the x-axis. And the y-intercept, the x would be 0 and our y value would be -2. Okay, so if we have 2 points, we need to first find the slope. The slope was not given. Okay, so that's step 1 again. Slope. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, so that's going to be, start with my second y, -2 minus 0 over 0 minus 4. Now be very careful with your signs. On top, -2 minus 0 is -2. On bottom, 0 minus 4 is a -4. Now to simplify that, first of all, a negative divided by a negative is going to become positive, and 2/4 will simplify to be 1/2. So my slope is a positive 1/2. Okay, step 2. I could go ahead and use the point slope form like I did in number 3, and that would work. Or I could recognize that the y-intercept was given, which means they gave me b. Okay, the y-intercept is b, so b equals -2. And if I know b, I can use the shortcut and go straight to y equals mx plus b. And then I just substitute. In place of m, I'm going to put the 1/2 that I just found. Don't forget to write the x. And then b is a -2. So rather than writing plus -2, you can just write -2. And that is the equation in slope-intercept form. So that shortcut is nice to use, saves you some time, saves you some work. However, again, if you are more comfortable just using the point slope form every time, then that certainly will work. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here, and we'll do a second video on graphing.